rabbit holes.
I was telling Brian the other day, I pride myself on trying to provoke critical thought. I'm like, I don't care what you think, I want you to think. So I describe myself as a thought provocateur where I'll stick my nose in a room, throw a thought grenade, and run away.
Bomb thrower, 100%.
And Tammy is a grenade.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. No, I was talking to my dean once, and she's looking at this, and she goes, "Is that a uterus?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she gets to go in, she starts to go into the, "Tammy, you can't. This is," or a State Department, things like this. And I cut her off, and I said, "And it provokes a conversation. And if you don't provoke the conversation, we don't have it, and then we continue to have our issues." Here, we go a little bit here.
I made a collage photo the other day, and some people really got angry of some gentlemen getting fire hosed during the civil rights movement, some students getting pepper sprayed at the Wall Street protests, and then the noose with the Capitol behind it on January 6th, with the captions running through it of politics is always a contact sport. Some people got real angry. They're like, these right-wing people trying to justify violence against the government. I was like, if that elicited such a strong emotional response to you, I am so glad. Get in there and push back. But that was not a pro.
No, and I think
I didn't think so anyway, but goodness.
this term I'm teaching a different group of students than I've worked with in a very long time. Most of my class is concurrent enrollment, so most of my class are high school students who are coming to the college to take 1 or 2 college classes.
Okay.
And I've gotten used to working with 20-somethings, 30-somethings, folks who have left the shelter of the K-12 system and have engaged in life outside of a guardian relationship. In doing that, in partaking in life, in making choices, you inevitably are going to pick up opinions, and as you go through things, you're able to better inform your opinions. I believe, and this is not my hypothesis, someone told me this and I was like, oh gosh, that's so smart, that makes so much sense. I believe that the political partisanship and the disconnection and the lack of community that we as a global and Indian society have really enabled in the past, 10, 15 years, has created an opportunity for our students, our kids, to exist without one having opinions or having to articulate them. So I'm trying to get into a space where I can have these candid conversations with my students and teach them how to develop an opinion and how to articulate your opinion without tying it to your identity. Because your opinion isn't a fact. Your opinion is your truth. It may not be a universal truth. And your opinion is constantly going to change as you encounter different people, scenarios, circumstances. That's just life in general. When we start evaluating people wholly by their opinions, we give ourselves less room to commune with people who aren't exactly like us. And if we're able to separate how people feel from who they are, that gives us a better starting point to work toward that consensus building that resolves conflicts. Right now, I think that we've given ourselves so much autonomy and independence because of technological advances and COVID necessity that we forgot that we're social creatures. We forgot how to commune with folks who aren't just like us. And we forgot how to listen without responding. And I don't know if that's recent. I don't know if that's 50 years, 60 years, but I think that preemption, that need to have to respond has really hampered any ability to move forward.
So generationally, the stuff that I've researched and written on kind of tracks through all of that, where the sins of the baby boomers and Gen X was to build a structure where, was it politics, sex, and religion? Why talk about it? Those are unfamiliar to us, and now we're not used to them. How dangerous is a kitchen knife? How dangerous is water? How dangerous is a plastic bag? Not very dangerous when you know what to do with it. But if you are kept away from those things, the sin of millennials to me was that of apathy.
Well, and
not to engage with those things.
And millennials are going to have that apathy, which I agree with wholeheartedly. But that's also going to be layered with how millennials are going to be raised differently than everybody else before them. Millennials are going to be raised by go get a grown-up. They're not going to be raised by duke it out on the playground and whoever fiercely wins, wins. We were taught the only way, I say we because I'm an elder millennial, we were taught that when you have a problem with another child, another person, a peer, you need to go get an unbiased opinion to settle it for you. We were never told, we were never taught how to work out our differences. We were told go get a referee. And always having the referee means you're winning. You're always trying to win. You may not try to be right, you may not try to be good, you're just trying to win. And oftentimes we decide based upon who the referee is.
And that, I think, it embeds this distrust of one's own opinion.
Absolutely.
And also absolves referees and stuff. I'm like, no, bias is inherent.
And it's not a bad thing. We have to get away from this idea that bias is the devil. Bias is part of being human. There's no way to get around it. If you have preferences, you have bias. If you have lived experiences, you have bias. Turns out, when I was a kid, I didn't think I liked Brussels sprouts. I just didn't like how my mom cooked them. And then I found that there's a better way to cook them. And
Gen X
I love
boiling all the vegetables to death.
Why did we do that? Yes, vegetable mush is not good, Mom. But again, that bias is developed, and that bias carried me through a couple of decades until someone forced me to try Brussels sprouts again, and that had me reevaluating my bias. But that bias is a defense mechanism. And without that bias, we are more vulnerable as human beings because those biases give us a layer of protection that without, we're more prey than we are not prey, necessarily predator.
And that's something when you've spoken about being aware of the motivations and purpose of those trying to manipulate or change your thoughts and actions and stuff like that. If someone claims to be unbiased, if someone claims to be telling you the truth, that's always that's the first thing a liar will say to you.
Absolutely.
If someone claims to be unbiased, I'm like, I don't trust you. I much prefer when someone discloses bias. Well, hey, as a 20-year Marine veteran and as a journalist in these aspects and as someone being raised in a liberal state, that's as much as I can disclose in 10 seconds, but as those things, blank opinion. Excellent. Now I have a better picture of you. I can judge those things and associate them to your opinion if I so wish.
We've taken this idea of a mediator to the extreme of we have to raise and socialize our kids as robots because otherwise we're grooming them and we are influencing them. Nothing drives me more crazy than when I'm on social media and I see if your students know your political affiliation, you have failed as an educator. And it's intended to be K through 12, and I understand that K through 12 is a protected system. But K through 12 is that safe system where we learn to wave our bullshit flags in a respectful way. And I think that educators, especially in higher ed, have a responsibility to lay out their biases and ask their students to think critically about them and pick them apart. Because my biases are informed by my experiences and they are wrong in a lot of instances. And the only way I'm ever going to learn that is interacting with others, laying my biases on the table, and having this candid conversation about how do we collectively live
And even within teachers, breaking down, humanizing kids to the teachers as well as the other direction teachers to students.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't sleep here? Wait, you have a husband? I thought boys had cooties. Wait, you're a man and you have a husband? How does that work?
Yes.
Politics touches everything in our lives. Kids will ask questions. If a 5-year-old asks you a question, and that question tears down the structures of your beliefs, my recommendation would be to get a structural inspection and maybe reset some things. That's a very delicate house of cards you're living in.
Well, and many of us are very uncomfortable with the idea of those that we perceive as either intellectually or experientially inferior schooling us. So when a 5-year-old asks me a question that is thought-provoking, I feel less than, because that 5-year-old apparently has more awareness about the world to be able to ask me that provocative question than I have as a 42-year-old woman. And that sits wrong with me. And my defenses kick up, and rather than listening and following the question and having the provocative conversation, I get defensive about, well, that's a question that maybe you shouldn't have asked, because that conversation is more uncomfortable than closing it down. And that gets back to the idea of no opinion. The 5-year-old then learns, I can either make them uncomfortable by asking these questions, and that's fun, or I can make them uncomfortable by asking these questions and I don't like it.
The learning will happen either way.
It's just which way
There's-
are you directing them?
There's a concept called chaos engineering, which is engineering to find points of failure and then go exploring and innovating from there.
That's education.
We can't learn what gets us to the moon without first failing at flight for a couple hundred years.
Got a 12-year-old
But kids-
trying to ingrain this in.
5-year-olds, 12-year-olds, they have a lot less
Failures
distance to the
build on.
ground. They can fall and it's not going to damage them a whole lot. They're made of cartilage. They don't need any ibuprofen yet.
My
They're
mother,
perfectly happy asking terrible questions like that. Adults are like, what's the family going to think? We have a lot further to fall and we're afraid of that.
I love that you say this, and this is one of those little divergents. My mom passed away almost 10 years ago, and she used to always tell us, I'm not a religious person, but my mother was, and she would always tell us that God made kids closer to the ground, and that's why they're supposed to fall, or that's why it's okay that they fall so much. God knew that you were going to fall down. God intended you to fall down, and that's why He made you so close to the ground. By the time you get bigger, it hurts to fall down, because in that time you were supposed to learn. And when you said that, that warmed my heart, because that's something that I grew up hearing all the time from my mom. You're supposed to fall down.
That's
You're
a
short.
that's a very important
It is.
lesson, and I feel like teachers a lot of times love the story, love the narrative, love the award-winning movies about, oh, and sometimes teachers can learn as much from the students, and then when it comes to practice, it's not supposed to go that way.
It's humbling. And you have to practice humility.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that it is not something that comes naturally to me. And it is something that my mentors have worked with me on for decades. Even within this own building, Bill Ashcraft has been one of my mentors who has been really instrumental at encouraging me to say, I don't know, I'm not sure, I'll get back to you. And then also of focusing more on the person rather than the situation.
Yeah.
I'm really good at looking at the situation and disregarding the person, and that gets us nowhere. And so being a good educator takes being raised by good educators, and many of us are unwilling because we have a credential that says I'm an expert. It's humility, and it's hard. So.
That's very hard. There were two things that I noticed with that, particularly the Feynman method of teaching. How would you explain the most complicated thing that you are an expert in? How would you explain it to a 5-year-old? How would you explain it to a 10-year-old?
Being a mother is the most helpful thing ever to being an educator, because you get
Explaining it to a teenager,
ridiculous
explaining it to a
questions.
high school graduate, explaining it to a college student. Now explain it to a neophyte in the field. Now explain it to a professional in the field. And when you're teaching other experts, that is true mastery. However, what good is that if your 5-year-old asks you about it and you can't explain the things you're most passionate about? And especially with speaking about politics and wanting to change people's minds, I had an epiphany in 2020. Everyone locked in and arguing online when I realized, I'm like, go into the conversation accepting that they'll come out the other side with the same opinion. If you accept that beforehand, it will change the way that you approach it. It will change you not trying to change their mind. That battle's not winnable. That's not where the battlefield is. But particularly, it's like they've had 20, 30, 40 years of a lifetime building up these world views, these life experiences, shaping them into the person that they are. Your witty comeback, I don't care how fire it is not going to change their mind. So what victories can we have from this? Maybe we ask questions. Maybe we learn something about each other. Once every day, if you get to say, I don't know, tell me more, that is a victory of a day, rather than having a day, I knew everything today.
Yeah.
That is a dangerous pitfall.
But that is what we have put out there as the truth, as the normal narrative. When you look at what we've put online and what we have put out in film and media over the past 50 years, we've put out this idealistic version of perfection. And all of us were raised and socialized with that ideal, if not in mind, in our universe. And then we get to be adults and we're like, this sucks. They lied to us. Like quicksand. I was really worried about quicksand when I was a kid. I thought that was going to be a really big problem. And now as a grown up, I'm like, I spent 20 years preparing how I was going to escape quicksand. And that's never been an issue in my life. When we are growing up, that's the time we're supposed to experiment. And I feel like we as a society have really narrowed that experimentation down in trying to protect our kids and to protect them rather than teach them how to survive. And that's another one of those flaws that's gotten worse as generations have gone on and on.
Yeah.
But as a parent, I want to save my kid from the struggles I went through. My kiddo's in middle school now, and by the way, it still sucks. Still awful. It did not get better in the 30 years since I was there. And I so badly want him to not have to suffer through the humiliation of puberty and growing up. Turns out we all have to, and that there's no way that I can protect him from it, but I keep trying to mitigate it. And I keep saying, Jack, here, I put some deodorant in your backpack. And hey, Jack, I washed your gym clothes again. And until he cares, it's just, there's nothing I can do about it.
But that's such an interesting thing about the sociocultural progress, when the first world problems that we're having is protecting our kids wrong versus having to pump out enough kids that the 60% mortality rate for infants
Absolutely. And hope I survive
offset.
in the process.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And I just don't want my kid to get made fun of for being smelly. Yeah.
It's not the worst thing. It's just different.
It is.
And when people talk about, well, internet bullying and cyberbullying is so bad, and internet strife and our perception, it's never been worse. I'm like, a couple years ago, we had different water fountains, man.
Yeah.
It's just different. When you start trying to play the trauma Olympics of who had it worse, boomers or millennials or Gen Z or whatever, like, comparing ourselves to each other is when we lose. It's different worlds. You can't compare. We're all living in alternative universes than the others. Some people are going to grow up their entire lives not knowing a world without the internet and what it looks like. It's just different.
That takes us kind of back to that initial conversation we were having between political violence and social violence in general. And since World War II, maybe even before World War II, maybe we'll go back all the way to World War I, we have, as a country, embraced national policies as solutions rather than more regional or state and local solutions. And a lot of that has been done because prior to that, when left to state and local decision making, we discriminated against those marginalized groups. And the most notable, of course, is the racial minorities that were discriminated against both legally and socially. But all minoritized groups were being disadvantaged and unable to live with the protections promised because of those social norms impeding the legal protections. When we see this shift and the federal government start to come in the 20th century to say, these promises that we've made, we have to uphold the promises in the Bill of Rights, and the states themselves and the people in the states themselves have become what we're trying to change. We want you, racist bigot, to change your perception about this person so we, the federal government, can not have to protect them from you because we promised them these rights. That's behavior modification. And as soon as our government starts to apply those federal applications, and I'm not condoning or denying that they're good or bad, or I'm not trying to put a value on that, that's going to create a mindset and an opportunity for us to believe that a one-size-fits-all policy is not only useful, but is achievable. And I don't think it's useful. I think that our policies around behavior modification have created a government entity that has lost all credibility. So many of the things that are regulated in our lives do not need to be regulated. But they're regulated because we have to commune with strangers, and those strangers we're fearful are going to take advantage of us. Let me ask you a question. When you go to the store and you open the door and someone's standing behind you, do you take 2 seconds to hold it open for them, or do you just keep walking?
I personally have a habit of always opening doors with the opposite hand, so I can always stand to the side with the
in
door
case someone
behind me
else
to
is
say hello.
Yeah.
To somebody, have a nice tiny social interaction.
Why?
That's something going. It puts skin in the game, and it is a social bet on my part. The reason I believe, as a radical introvert and someone tends towards hermeticism and stuff like that, I
Yeah.
realize the value of social interaction and being indebted to the society around me. So that way, social interactions like that, I feel that I am contributing towards somebody else's nicer day. I feel like they will be indebted to someone else to pass that on. I feel that most importantly, particularly in the online sense, we no longer have interpersonal reactions. We have social
They're all
interactions that are,
transactions.
but everyone else sees it. They're like, oh yeah, I could hold the door for someone else.
Mhm.
So that to me, it's just like paying taxes. I want to feel like I care about this person. I don't care if I know them or not. I want to feel like I would do something for them. I want to feel like there's something on the line for me to be a better person in the society around me. That is a very, very personal choice. And the catch is, there's some days when you end up resenting the society around you, when
Uh-huh.
absolutely no one said thank you, when you got absolutely nothing
Yep.
good from it. But I am putting that bet in. I am playing the game versus hoarding all my chips. I've got mine, you get yours.
Absolutely.
Whether a very social person or a very antisocial person is interacting with the society around them, playing every hand, but refusing to do anything but the ante. Why should I have to pay taxes? Taxation is theft. That's somebody not engaged. So that is, I have a very particular answer.
But I think
that.
that you're speaking to the same thing that I'm saying, though, in that your motivations for your behaviors have nothing to do with what the legal system says you should do. Your behaviors are modified by your surroundings, by the society you live in, and by your own personal goals and your own personal wants. And that is the motivating factor. It's not the loss as I have to. When the federal government comes in and says, you have to do this, even a state government comes in and says, you have to do this, our immediate natural response is, make me. But when it feels like it's our own choice, when it feels like we get the option of doing it or not, we tend to do it. And we tend to do it because it's not necessary, but damn, it sucks when someone doesn't do it for you. It sucks when your arms are full and someone doesn't hold that door. And you know that that happened. And you know what? It turns out you're not an asshole. And you know you're not an asshole. So I'm going to do this, not because I have to, but because I want to. We have gotten to the point where I don't want to hold the door open for you because you may be a Trump voter and I'm not. So I'm going to take a guess based on what you look like and where we are, and I'm going to evaluate whether I hold the door open based upon who you are, not just that you are. And I think a lot of that stems from the government telling me you have to do this, or people feeling like that. When we protect a group's rights that wasn't protected before, those that were protected feel as if they have lost something. And we tend to look at rights as, like the sign says, pie. And that if you get the same rights that I have, and I don't think I have more rights than you to begin with, it feels like you got extra rights.
Do those governmental prescriptions, what can people do when they are being politically engaged or disengaged when those governmental prescriptions align or misalign with our own beliefs on what other people should be held to open the door for me?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that depends upon where you live. Primarily, are you in a rural area or are you in an urban area? In urban areas, in areas where you have large amounts of populations that are living in the same area, if you will, they are interacting with a lot of strangers. They're not interacting with a lot of people they know. Now, do you behave differently in a group of people you know versus a group of people you don't know? We all do. We all have our different personalities. And in an urban area, it is much easier for a diverse group to cohabitate and not have to actually commune. In a rural area, that's much harder. So if I have diversity in an urban area, you're going to get your little pockets of people that start to commune together so you can cohabitate and have that communion and never have to actually have collective communion.
More specialization, but more interdependence versus the rural.
In a rural area, you can't. There's one church, and if you want to be a person of God, you don't get to pick your denomination, and you certainly don't get one of those funny ones that we don't have out here. And it's that communion becomes more personal, and when the government's telling you you have to commune with these people, as opposed to I get to, that's different. If a person comes to my church and they are different than me, automatically we have a strain of similarity because we're in the same church. If I go to public school, that strain has to be the system of governance or the system, the structure itself. And that's not what is keeping the glue together anymore. Those structures don't mean anything. And so we are more reluctant to send our kids to these schools that don't have those strains. We're more reluctant to go to these events that don't have those strains of similarity, because the discomfort of always being an outcast, of always being the outsider, is not something that anyone's going to embrace over and over and over again. We all want that feeling of belonging. So I think a lot of it stems from that rural versus urban, and a lot of the policies that are coming out of the federal government are around urban issues, urban problems, and our solutions tend to be more urban situated. That makes sense. Utilitarianism, more bang for your buck. I can feed more people in a small condensed area cheaper than I can out here when I got to commute. It makes more sense. Those rural areas feel as if, and when I say rural, I'm saying 50,000 or less. I'm not even thinking 8. I'm thinking the even bigger rural. They feel as if the policies that are being forced upon them, they're paying for, but they don't apply to them. And rather than actually trying to understand the purpose of the policy, we're going to focus on who the policy is impacting or intended to impact, and that's where our resentments start to grow. So rather than looking at why protections of the queer community need to be federally mandated and enforced, rather than trying to understand why this group is minoritized in the first place and what I can do in this theoretical democracy to make sure that we all have these same protections, my default is your problems, your issues that don't apply to me are forcing the government to force me to change things. You're asking the government to serve you in ways that the government does not serve me. The queer community says, no, we're asking the government to serve us in the same way that they serve you that they never have before. And the rural folk tend to say no, because here's the thing. Ahmadinejad said it best. He was the president of Iran in the early 2000s, and Iran has enormous anti-gay laws and anti-gay sentiment. And he went to the UN and he said, "You all have these problems with homosexuals, but we don't. We don't have that in Iran." And the UN just busted up laughing and were like, "Well, yeah, because again, you condemn them to death, so it's not something that anyone actually embraces." In a lot of those rural areas, you have much more conservative beliefs and you have less diverse beliefs simply because of exposure. And rather than embracing different, we tend to be wary of it. So if I am part of the queer community, I want the protections of the federal government, but I don't want to need them. And that's a really, really hard place to be in.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are right now. If I'm on the side of needing to be protected from, that pisses me off too, because I'm not a predator. I'm not trying to step on your rights, when in fact I am, but I feel targeted because I don't think that I am. I don't know how to fix that. The only thing I know how to fix is that when we start having interactions with each other in everyday situations, especially those that provoke really, really low engagement dependence, that's when things start to move. So when I'm getting on the train and the door's closing and someone who I have a bias against engages in very low stakes and holds the door open, those interactions, and then me saying thank you as opposed to ignoring the fact that they did it because I don't believe that they have rights or that they're human or whatever my bias is, and I accidentally say thank you because it's just my habit, and that person sees me behave in a humane way, it doesn't feel like a lot, but those small interactions are what move the needle, and we're preventing ourselves from having those small interactions.
In keeping with the analogy of gambling and betting, whether with taxes or social engagement, political engagement, the disaffectedness you were describing is like a small ranch town of 200 putting a bet down at the blackjack table, and the casino, in the best interest of the casino to keep the casino running, takes that bet and goes and puts it at the craps table.
Absolutely.
Well, would. But do you think that encourages more small betting engagement? Let's just put that one up there. Let's just put that one up there.
I think a lot of it is misconceptions. I also think it's a lot of misperceptions. Most of us consume media that is mass produced, but very narrow casted. Meaning all of the national news that I get is coming from big news networks that are centered in urban areas. There's no reason for NBC to exist in that town of 200. They're going to send in a reporter from the big city to report on it and then go back out. And so the only time rural folks see themselves in mass media is when urban areas are portraying them. I don't know that rural areas, especially those that are much more removed from the urban elites, essentially most of the Midwest and the West in general, I don't know that they have a proper understanding of how anything works, because how do I trust the media who constantly portrays me as riding a horse and has no understanding of what rural life actually is and keeps telling me that I am the one that needs to change to amend to their values? And then I'm the urban folk and I say, y'all are way backward out here. You need to fix this, 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 and this to move in with us. As long as we continue to see that in the media in the forefront, we're perpetuating the stereotypes and we're ensuring that we don't have that accurate understanding. I like to remind my students all the time, y'all don't have gardens, Y'all don't have slaughterhouses, you don't have fields. Turns out that the only reason that you eat every day is because these rural folk are providing your food. That light is on, not because of me. It's because those rural folk are removing the fossil fuels and burning them for me. I can sit back here and say, climate change. But I'm the one that's consuming it, and they're the ones that are producing that for me to consume. Without that rural economy and that rural labor, my existence does not work. Same thing with the rural folk. If I grow 30,000 acres of corn, I can't eat that. I've got to have someone to buy it. And it's got to be those urban folk who can't grow their own corn. So it's an understanding that the relationship of survival is dependent on each other. And if I'm dependent upon you, I'm going to treat you with difference. It may not be respect, it may not be kindness, but it's an awareness and a knowledge that I can't live without you, and that changes my behavior.
And that friction of dealing with people different than you, because in a world as big and interconnected as we are, yeah, even farmers, they need a corporate green giant to be able to sell the corn to.
And to
and where do
distribute
those
it.
CEOs live?
And they also need the federal government to provide for subsidies when we have bad crop years. Because turns out climate change means there's less water out here, which means I can't grow the same crops. And I have to diversify, which is going to be an economic lift on the farmer's part. They're hand to mouth. There's no where the money's coming in there. We need the government to support with crop insurance and subsidize the prices so you and I aren't paying all of that. But the government has done a very, very good job of being perceived as the boogeyman between the consumer and the producer, between the urban and the referee, if you will, as opposed to the conduit. And I think that the government oftentimes is feeling like they have to decide urban or rural. I have to choose winners and losers. And it always comes back to, how do I keep my job? And I keep my job by pleasing the most people. That tends to be that urban center and those urban policies that the media is really good at telling us about because they affect them. And it kind of perpetuates the cycle.
Yeah.
Right now, on a federal level, Republicans or those that represent more rural areas, as is true for every decade in the United States' history, have more power than those large population states. We built it that way. It's it was called the Grand Compromise, that we're going to have popular representation in one and proportional in the other. Those in those minor or rural states, they wield so much power right now, but not enough to move the needle. They can only obstruct. The Democrats on the other side, those that tend to be more urban, they so badly want to change and progress and address all of these issues, but they can't do it without the buy-in from the rurals. And the rural folks say, you won't even engage with us in the conversation. You just let wolves go in my backyard because y'all feel bad about wolves being extinct for 200 years in Colorado. You don't care about me. You don't have to worry about the wolves. I lost 18 cattle over it. That disconnect grows even deeper, and the resentment grows deeper.
Do you think building off of, what would the ideal relationship between someone's personal interests, like their cattle, like their lifestyle, livelihood, and the world directly around them, play into finding what criteria matters to one's political identity? Because some people only vote on, well, I'm a farmer, I only care about these things. Some people vote on, I'm a woman, I only care about these things. How can people get a sense of their political identity without making it a 9-to-5?
That's hard. And it's hard because there are literally billions of dollars out there trying to influence your political identity that's not necessarily influencing it in your best interest. So the easiest way is to go out and take some of those little political tests that ask a bunch of questions. Don't take one, don't take two, don't take three, take several.
Okay. They're
And
composite.
and get it. And here's the thing, you're going to get different answers, you're going to get different questions.
How dare.
And then you put it all together and you say, okay, well, this one says I'm here. They're going to put you in a bucket. Now, the problem that we have in our country right now is that our political parties aren't functioning as parties. Parties are supposed to be these platforms of like-minded individuals who are going to move the needle because they're like-minded. Our parties have turned into glorified fundraisers. They are not winning elections based upon governing. They're winning elections based upon influence, and our policies show it. Part of the problem is that we have elections every 2, 4, 6 years, and every problem that we have tasked our government with takes longer than 2, 4, 6 years to solve. And when you come back to me in 2 years and say, I want my job back, I'm going to say, okay, what have you done? I expect a win in those 2 years. I don't expect that you're going to tell me I started the process and turns out it's going to be a several year negotiation before we get it through.
Yeah.
The voters are expecting short-term wins, and the candidates have to produce them to get reelected or they're primaried. So we're part of the problem. We are too unengaged in informing our opinion and too willing to let our opinion be influenced and informed for us. And the little phones, I say little phones like y'all, but it's me too, they've just made that conduit so much easier because everything I do, everything I say, it's hearing and it's compiling, and that phone is making money for somebody. And what I say and do is a consumable product now.
Mm-hmm.
And my pocketbook is being influenced as well as my opinion. And those phones have given a really, really good indication of where my Achilles heels are. What are my positions that I'm most willing to vote on? Now that's always going to be shifting as well. Before I became a mother, I was completely on board with the idea of you have a child, you get to decide whether you vaccinate your child or not. I'm going to vaccinate mine, so if your kid dies, fine. My kid won't because it's going to be vaccinated. Believe that it's a parental right. And then I had to send my child to daycare when he was very, very young. As an adjunct, I didn't have the luxury of taking 3 months off to stay home with my baby. I had to send him to daycare. And I had to send him to daycare before he was fully vaccinated, before he was eligible to be fully vaccinated. And my infant that was less than 3 months old was exposed to whooping cough because some other mother made the choice of not vaccinating her child. Colorado law says it's up to you. And my defenseless, literally defenseless child has nothing to protect them. My opinion changed on a dime. And now I'll vaccinate you. I've got a little stash of needle in here. I'll poke in, but I'm just kidding. But those life experiences, you can't learn. You have to live.
Mm-hmm.
And those life experiences are always going to inform where you sit. So I want you to not only take these tests, all of them, I want you to take them regularly so you see where you sit. Because if you take one now, in 10 years, you're going to be different. In 5 years, you're going to be different. And our parties don't necessarily take this into account.
In the US, there's a genetic, traditional, inherited, passed down fetishization of freedom and separation of personal liberties from government. But do you think there's a place for obligate education or obligatory political engagement? You have to take a test once every 2 years, once every 5 years. You have to have a minimum of whatever political things, or compulsory voting even.
Compulsory voting, I'm against simply because it doesn't make, you're going to go in and you're going to draw designs on your ballot. Compulsory does not mean informed. Voter turnout is not the only indication of good governance.
Okay.
Yes, we want high voter turnout, but we want informed voter turnout. I don't know where I sit because I see both sides, and that's what I think makes me a good educator is I can't decide because I can explain why both sides matter. When you look at political engagement, when you make it mandatory, inevitably there's a bar for access that's set. Currently, it's not mandatory, so if you choose not to try to cover that wall, you don't have to, and there's no harm, no foul, except for you don't get to participate. In order to participate, you have to meet a couple of criteria, predominantly have a residential address and register to vote. And that creates a gap for some people to participate. You've raised the bar too high. If the bar is that high already, and then I add tests and education or other requirements, I'm raising the bar even further. And the people who I'm raising the bar, that access to entry, there are less and less and less folks that get to participate, that can participate. Now, those that are participating say, you could if you want to. You gotta take the day off, you gotta all these other things. But there are practical considerations. There are even access to information considerations that need to be brought into. Also, when you look at man's history, when we put those criteria in place, they inevitably are used to further marginalize minoritized groups. If I put in a literacy test, inevitably I'm going to disenfranchise folks who can't read and write. Now, reading and writing is, in most instances, a skill that was taught by the state through public schools. What happens if that doesn't happen? What happens if I don't get that skill because I go to school in a underfunded school district and frankly it's glorified babysitting? I'm never going to get access. So I don't think adding additional requirements is the way to provoke the change we want. I think it provokes involvement, but I don't think that involvement is authentic, and I think that inauthentic involvement leads us towards inauthentic solutions.
Yeah.
But if you don't engage people, then the few that are engaged drive the entire system to where they are. Wealth equality in the United States is at all-time enormous gaps. We have the very, very wealthy and we have the very, very poor. When we saw these data points, these statistics previously, it was right before, again, the Great Depression, and when the state comes in and says, whoa, we gotta narrow this gap. You, Rockefeller family, you guys have way too much, and you, Dust Bowl families, you have way too little. You guys gotta put some back in for these guys to move up. We've created enough disengagement to allow for that to happen again. And we're going to have to re-engage to fix some of that.
Do you think the engagement goes to the 1%ers as well as the disaffected?
Absolutely.
We're going to have to involve both of them to whatever degrees we agree upon.
Because our solutions are going to have to be financed.
Okay.
And that money exists.
It's going to have to come from someone and go towards someone, just as the goods and the corn.
Who paid for the Great Deal? We had all these programs. No, we had a 98% tax on those barons. We took the mentality of you broke it, you fix it. So one of the policies, and this is where Bernie Sanders got in a lot of trouble when he was running, is he argued we need to have something similar. The digital revolution has created a divide again, just like the industrial revolution did. And the only way to bridge that gap is to take those digital barons, say, you broke it, you buy it, and they're the ones that have to finance it. Now, they're not going to finance it willingly, nor should it be their responsibility. It is not the responsibility in a democracy for the top 5% to pay for everything. But when you structure the economy to where 95% goes that way, there is no other opportunity to finance the solutions.
Yeah.
So no, you got to bring both in. But I have to get the wealthy to understand that the investment is not a deficit to me, right?
A deficit to me being who?
The 5%. I have to be able to when I write the check,
Mhm.
not be resentful that I'm writing the check. I have to understand that me releasing these resources, me contributing these resources is a benefit to me. Maybe it doesn't feel like it because it's leaving my bank account and I'm not going to see any other resources, but what does it buy me?
Do you think that gets a little dangerous with how privatized capital currently is in politics? Because we do see private companies, individuals that have billions upon billions who say, I like this guy, and they
Absolutely.
choose to fund it because they're not, I have money, I have yachts, I don't care about that. I want influence.
In
I
my
want
opinion-
power. I want social changes.
In my opinion, that has been one of the traditions that's created the mess that we're in. And that since the early 1990s, since the Soviet Union crumbled and we didn't have this external enemy that we were more focused on defeating, we're going to see a massive pattern of deregulation through most of Clinton's presidency. We attribute it to Clinton, but it's going to be Congress that goes through this deregulatory boom. That goes through in the 90s with the advent of the internet and the expansion of access across the board. My opinion is the combination of those two things, the deregulation in our finance, in our electioneering, in how we spend money, tied with how we communicate and how open that communication has come, has created a lot of the problem.
Yeah.
So in solving it, yes, we're gonna have to change some of those systems. But those that are benefiting from those systems have all the power right now. They have all the money. And they have no incentive to want to change them, and they have every resource to put into place to not have to change them.
Yeah.
So it comes down to, again, the idea of how do I get them to want? How do I get the 5% to understand that it's in their benefit to raise the bottom up? Because right now they're sitting in their ivory towers and they don't see a benefit because they're not dealing with it. How do we see that? Only way that I've ever seen work is if you commune.
There was a quote from Karl Marx that the most dangerous point in society is when you have class-conscious proletariat working with class-conscious bourgeoisie. And we're starting to see that with voluntary redistribution of wealth. A lot of people seem to complain about that online, especially if someone runs up and gives away Disney tickets or gives money to homeless or buys 200 pizzas at once. I'm like, that's literal redistribution of wealth. In exchange for internet points, don't care. Don't care. There was the Indian billionaire of a social media company who said we should outlaw billionaires. Like, but you're a billionaire. He's like, I don't care. No one's going to care about me if I go down to one yacht.
Here's the problem with that. Those with the 5% are only willing to give commodities. We're not willing to give cash. And when I'm only trying to fill this gap with commodities, I rob most of my society of all the skills that capitalism gives us. The idea of planning, of budgeting, of working with delayed gratification and saving and not impulse buying. All of those things are skills that we learn primarily through economics. If I give everybody a box of food, they don't learn how to budget, they don't learn how to shop, they don't learn how to read prices, they don't learn how to compare. A box of food shows up. So yes, we need that, but we need cash. We need cash in order to enable the folks that can't take care of themselves to be able to. Not give them what they need. We need to give them the tools to have them enable themselves. We can't do that through subsidized housing. We can't do that through food boxes. We can't do that through subsidized healthcare or subsidized childcare. We need to do it with cold hard cash. And that makes everyone insecure because we have demonized those needing support as welfare models.
And that goes to the economic fluency.
Yeah.
When
Well-
they are kids, they're 5-year-olds that you're giving $200. What's a 5-year-old going to do with it?
It-
They're going to buy candy, but they're also 5. They're neophytes. They'll fall down and they'll learn.
That's
You
micro.
continue giving kids,
Yep.
adults,
Next
people
generation,
learning,
absolutely.
people learning it enough money, they'll start getting salads.
Uh-huh.
They'll start growing their
Well,
own community
Perhaps
gardens.
look at the macro though. If I am the government and I'm giving boxes of food, I'm going to go out and I'm going to shop for the most efficient way. I want to get my most bang for my buck. And so I'm going to go to Cargill and I'm going to go to Kellogg and I'm going to go to these big corporate giants who are already enormously influential and enormously resourced because they can give me the food. But they're going to give me the food that's beneficial for them to give me. And the money slushes around between the government and the corporation. And we get the commodity. I get fed shit. I get fed gross stuff. I don't get the salads and the fruits and stuff. I get what shows up in the box. If I give the mom cash, the mom is more likely to spend that locally. The mom is more likely to buy produce from her neighbor down the street than she is to go and get it from the grocery store. The neighbor is more likely to use the neighbor for babysitting as opposed to go paying the child care conglomerate that is all bonded and licensed and everything. And my kid's getting one-on-one care here. Granted, it's with my elderly neighbor who she's a little crazy, but my kid's getting the care they need. And that money stays here. Because then the grandma that's babysitting uses it to pay the kid that's mowing her lawn. And it flushes around in that and continues to flush around.
Giving more chips to people to bet where they want and what games they want. And the more bets that are placed, even if they're small bets, having someone watch your kid. Oh, you learned, Anthony mowed the yard like shit. And you're not going to hire him again. Or maybe you coach Anthony to mow yards better and he goes into landscaping.
And maybe you learn that Anthony's out mowing lawns because Anthony's taking care of his single mother that has 3 kids and dad wasn't able to migrate with us. So I am the breadwinner and Anthony's out there and I know that and I'm like, oh my goodness. Well, they're probably going to need some English language lessons. And turns out I'm an English teacher. So maybe before church on Sunday, I'm going to invite him over for coffee and we'll do a quick little conversation. Those things don't happen if a box of food shows up on my porch.
Yeah.
But we're not willing to invest in cash. Some progress. This is not domestic progress. This is international progress. About 10, 15 years ago, we saw a lot of philanthropy in this area, predominantly in smaller settings in Africa, where you have the Gates Foundation that says, we're going to take $1 million and we're going to put it into cash and we're going to give it to this town of 500 and we're going to give it to the moms. That's it. And it's just a cash. Here's $5,000 for each of you. And the moms are like, this is crazy, but it's cash, so I'm totally going to take it. And then we watch it, and then we see what happens. And we can see that that infusion of cash is all that society needed, that small village needed in order to network outside of their village to make the connections they needed. They're not making them with Walmart. They're not making them with the companies that gave them the money because it was an altruistic donation. The Gates Foundation didn't donate that money because they wanted to turn them into consumers. They did it to stabilize. And we tend to only invest and expect a return on capital. So that's kind of where we're stuck. But those ideas are out there. Inevitably, you're going to have someone that takes advantage of these programs. Free cash. They're the ones that are going to make the news.
And will those ones be able to continue to grow a healthy family and pass down those habits and those thoughts and those inheritances and that attitude?
We don't know, but that's the investment we're making. We lose control over it. That's the hope. But again, we're investing and
we're betting on them.
We are. And we're betting. Here's my Achilles heel. And this is something that Brian likes to, he doesn't like to remind me. He does a very good job of reminding me. I don't think he does it intentionally. I get too involved in the structures and forget that there's personal autonomy and individualism involved. I forget that free will is part of the equation, and I tend to overemphasize the impact of structures. So my solutions that I've outlined here don't take into account human nature because they're mostly theoretical. The problem is that you're going to have a portion of that doesn't, the money, the resources that don't go the way that they are. You're going to have people who are going to take advantage. You've also created an enormous group of potential victims for fraud. So
again, the liberal neopolitical thing is, well,
people are assholes. There's no way you can govern.
Who's an easier mark? Who has more of their guard down if all you have is the way that they vote?
And some of us are just jerks. We like to think that that's not true. We like to think that, oh, there's circumstances. Some of them are just assholes. And unfortunately, those assholes, while they may be very few in number, they make an outsized splash when they jump. And that's what we tend to focus on. We don't focus on the other 4 people who did not become Rhodes Scholars, but holy crap, they're raising healthy, stable families, and that's a win.
Yeah.
Our priorities are misplaced, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that's easier to do when I don't know that I need you to survive, because I can order things on my phone and they show up on my porch. And I don't even have to see you. My dog barks at you, you throw it, and woohoo, I've got groceries.
So for outside of the interests of the system, the organizations of government, and outside of the systems and organizations of society, how can individuals as voters, as citizens, as humans, as people, get more self-awareness, self-discovery, and self-empowerment with politics? Because it touches everything we see, we hear, we touch in our lives. But not all of us have the time and the economic ability to become Rhodes Scholars in it. Not all of us have the mental resilience to read through the headlines every day and be like, oh my God, what do they say now?
I think that goes back to an awareness and understanding of dependence, of the dependence that we need. If I'm a Rhodes Scholar, who am I spending most of my time with?
Okay.
Rhodes Scholars, or those that are also in that same understanding. And oftentimes we forget that that's a subset of the whole. We do this in academia all the time. Turns out there's a lot of us that do a lot of thinking around here, and we like to talk about it. And we all have specialties, and we all have more than average information about our topics when compared to the general public. Then we go out and we commune with our families and the general public, and we forget that y'all don't have advanced degrees. Y'all don't know the secret coded language that we in academia have taught ourselves and live by. It's very easy to see less than when it's different as opposed to just different. And it's really easy to undervalue it. We as a society have spent 30, 40, 50 years telling everyone, go to college, go to college, go to college, go to college, and college is the path to stability. Not taking into account that some of us aren't cut out for college. Some of us are cut out for other things. Turns out if I'm a phenomenal artist, art school, or maybe an apprenticeship under an artist, those are going to be better tools than go to university and get $100,000 in debt so you have this piece of paper that says you're a good artist. We as a society need to come into the understanding that people have different capacities, and our responsibility as a society is to create one where each capacity has a fit and a value. The bus driver is less valued than the heart surgeon, but that's only because there's more ability to bus drive, and there's less investment in individual self-improvement to be a bus driver than there is to be a cardiovascular surgeon. If I'm going to be a heart surgeon, I've also needed a shit ton of investment. My society has to teach me, my education system has to teach me. So they've invested in me. Obviously, I'm of value to them, and it's my responsibility to go back and serve. The bus driver has that same value because how does the cardiologist get to work? He can't fly. He certainly can't take his own car because that's not going to work. There's no parking. He's going to have to take this, and the bus driver is necessary for it. We have to value those the same, and we don't. We degrade the bus driver because they're just a bus driver. Hell, we don't even take public transit because other people take public transit. I'm going to sit in the privacy of my own car on I-25 and just see that you guys all have the audacity to also be on I-25. We have to understand that we are not autonomous. We aren't. We are social creatures.
Mixing and having more of these experiences. It reminds me of an analogy I had when you toss a person into a jar of mixed nuts and you start shaking it up, they're all going to rub off on one another.
Absolutely.
Their flavors are going to change. The delicate parts of them will probably get knocked off. But the more resilient parts will remain for everyone involved in this bag of mixed nuts that you're shaking up. All of a sudden, you're only left with the most durable structures
and
in each individual.
The nuts themselves are much better suited to be rolling around in there. When you put them in there, they were all edgy, and so when they bumped into people, when they bumped into each other, it hurt, and they had to get damaged in order to. By the time we get all smoothed, I can bump in, and it doesn't hurt as bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's that exact same thing. We've made dependence transactional as opposed to personal, and I think that makes it very easy to undervalue people. I do it all the time. And I am just as guilty simply because I've got shit to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have time to invest in everybody. I don't have time to value the bus driver. I'm pissed. I'm late. He's late. Let's go. Life gets in the way.
It gets to that point of what's in it for me. But so for engaging younger voters, apathetic voters, people who has the better haircut, how can we convince them as individuals what's in it for you?
I wish I had an answer.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I do it like the reason I do what I do, the reason I teach at a community college, the reason I'm active in civic engagement at a college is because it makes me feel like I'm doing something. I don't know if it's actually helping. I don't know. But I know that I get to go home at night and I get to say, I actually put my money where my mouth was. I did it. I went out there, and if it doesn't work, I still get to say I tried. I'm in a very luxurious, privileged position to be able to do that, though, because engaging is not an investment. It's my job. So they're the same for me. Most of us, it's an added goodness accessory that I have to work in. I'm an enigma. I'm really lucky that I get to work in this space because I get to do both. How do we as individuals live our lives and engage? I don't know.
But when you treat it as your job to just go into the table, I'm loving the betting and gambling analogy. When it's your job to go in and bet, when it's your job to win enough to be able to go home, when you're making enough money that you're getting the 1099G every single year, that is the number of engagements that you have made. Social contracts with other people, political contracts with other people.
And I work with marginalized communities. Most of my students that I've encountered in my 13 years on Auraria, their understanding of government is when the structures have gotten in their way or prevented them from being able to do what they wanted to do. I get to introduce the idea that the structures are yours to use. You just have to learn how to use them.
Mm-hmm.
And we also live in a society that has historically intentionally chose who has access to them and who doesn't.
Yes.
Our system only works if you work it, and it only works for the people who work it. And most of my students don't feel like, one, they can work it, and two, that their work has any effort or has any value at all. My job is to explain to them that it does. You may not see it at the ballot box, but you do see it in the daily conversations you have, and the community around you starts to change.
May I share a cultural observation story that I've had
Yes.
that made me, it's a fight I need to pick with you that I noticed the other day.
Okay.
So you had a shirt that said read, think, vote.
Yes.
I worked for a number of years in customer service over the phone.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most beneficial things I was trained on was to recognize you will get people who cannot read. The other catch is over the phone, they're not going to tell you.
Never.
But when you see somebody from Kentucky, when you see their address as mile marker 75, and when you ask them, okay, that's no problem, we're going to find the input button, and you hear silence. Most of us can find the input button on a remote,
Mm-hmm.
but you hear silence. The big red, most people know colors, the big red button up in the corner, it's right below that, one button below that. It's two buttons left of the volume control. Most of us know how to turn the volume up and down on TV.
If nothing else, trial and error. Yeah.
And being able to save them their dignity, to not have to admit that they can't read and find other ways to be interdependent for this social exchange. Hey, you're a customer of ours, we are serving you with that. But that's someone who can't read, probably was never taught, probably never needs to. And then even thinking, provoking critical thought. How can we do that in educated, the 1%er communities, much less farming communities, rural communities like that? Have you been in a DMV and you expect these people to pass the sentience test that now we're putting to AI? Define sentience, define thinking.
I think it's a step beyond that. I think it's not only accommodating the illiterate, but it is truly embracing the value that illiteracy is not a deficit.
Ooh, okay.
That literacy is a skill, absolutely, and literacy is definitely a benefit. But when a person does not have this benefit, I have to be able to perceive them and value them as much as someone who is literate. And I don't think most of us do. Most of us look at it and we come into it and we say, I gotta make you literate. I gotta help you get here. When our understanding needs to be, you don't need to be literate because I am.
Yeah.
And I have that value for us. And my responsibility now is to share that value. It goes back to Taylor. So what's your purpose? If I have the skill and you don't, I'm an asshole if I don't do something about it.
And that interdependency, yeah, sure, I may be literate and be able to elucidate on philosophies of transcendentalism and hermeneutics, but I don't know how to change the water pump over for the agriculture fields, much less at what time of day the watering needs to get done for these fields. Yeah. I can't do that.
I can't grow my own food. Yeah, absolutely. But we are so, look, it's colonization, it's missionaryism. We think that we found the answer and we want to share it with others because we think we're doing good. We may be doing good to some extent, but we're also doing a lot of harm because we're trying to get folks to change to what we are, as opposed to engaging with them for who and what they already are. And that's a human issue. Like, I don't think we can socialize that out because it makes us feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
We like communing. You and I are very similar and we get along to talking really, really well. But you've been in the situation where you've been across the desk from somebody who's very different from us, and it's like pulling teeth having a conversation. We have to be able to value those the same, even though we don't feel as much value through those interactions.
There's also a concept that some people potentially have rewired neuroplasticity to be more familiar with the new stuff, because something I noticed is you and I may be very similar, but you and I never really speak about the things we agree on.
No.
Just constantly, it's like, ooh, but what about this?
And we're always talking at 50,000 feet. we're not talking
and discoursing
about,
like as if we disagreed with one another.
we're having dialogue, we're not having a conversation. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, no, I don't think, now this is my therapist coming out of me. It's my defense mechanism. It is what I do to protect myself in the society. I put on my hat of brain and knowing stuff, and it's where I feel most comfortable in social interactions. You put me at a dinner party where I've been warned by my husband on the way in that we aren't here for education, Tammy, which happens every time. I'm so uncomfortable because no one wants to have these conversations with me. They want to talk about things like our kids playing sports, which is so boring. Yes, he plays sports, it's a ball, it's a bat, what do you do? He runs very slow, I'm sorry, you got that from me. That doesn't pique my interest as much.
Versus talking about the knowledge and values and beliefs of stuff. That's the thing I have too, where I always say culture is built on epistemology, what we know and how we know it, ontology on what exists, so the actions and habits we're taking in the world, and axiology, the values we have. I'm like, those are big words, but those are the only conversations I have.
Yeah.
I will translate them, but what I'm getting out of this conversation is what you value, what you believe, who you heard it from. I'm like, I'm getting very different things than the weather and sports and
Absolutely.
stuff like that.
But most of us only engage in that shallow way because it's...
Maybe we need to engage with people in shallow ways then.
If
that reaches 50% of every room.
I think we do, because we don't have the volume to invest in everyone. It's not physical. It's not physically possible. There's only enough of us to go around, and we have to prioritize our investment. So if I'm investing all of my time, interest, and energy into my students and at school, when I get home in the evenings, my husband calls it leftover Tammy. They get leftover Tammy. And that's when I come home and I'm like, oh my gosh, I would love it if you would cook dinner, because I poured my heart and soul into this institution. But I have to reverse that in times as well and put that into where I don't necessarily want to, into baseball and watching the stupid baseball games. And I have to show investment. I can't show resentment, because that's just not the right thing to do. But I'd much rather be talking politics. Absolutely.
Are there any other questions I haven't asked that you would want me to ask you?
No, I want us. I've got myself a little note up here that says legitimize how they feel, even if you don't agree with why they feel that way. And that is something that I'm trying very, very, very hard to embrace. And I think that mentality is cracking that door of willingness a little bit to get us out of the morass we've gotten ourselves in. I have gotten to the point that I am valuing people only because of how they got to what they think. Where I look at a supporter who doesn't support my ideology, whether you are on the right or the left right now, there's a huge morass with me. I need to be able to separate the person from their feelings, because that person's feelings are going to change, but that person's always going to be that person. And if I go in there and I say, I understand that you feel this way, I don't agree with it, but I understand it, and I actually feel that, and you feel that, then I'm going to actually have conversations with you that take that investment. If I feel like I'm going to lose by engaging, I'm never going to engage.
Debate, it's a thing. I've done interviews with a couple national level debaters where I contend, and a number of them agree with me, debate should be mandatory in high school. Maybe one of those things, minimum 1 year, but it can be an elective. It's like, get used to asking people for your sources, get used to backing yourself up, get used to defending ideas that aren't yours so you can understand.
Form your ideas.
And that does a lot more of that interdependence and walking sort of in their shoes, but understanding it's like, dude, changing someone's mind isn't the victory. I was asking a few
Nor
people
should it
about
be the goal.
the presidential debates, and people that didn't watch it or politically disaffected and stuff like that would ask me, like, oh, well, who won? I'm like, I don't think you're ready for this conversation.
No.
Academic high school level debates have judges, they have criteria, they have scoring, they have
What's the
styles.
purpose?
But when you get into professional debates, to me, I'm used to 3 hours of an imam and a Jew sitting on stage talking about morality for 3 hours. There's no winner, there's no loser.
But that's not
The
what the
winner's the
presidential
audience.
election purpose is.
That's what is the purpose, though?
What gets people to vote? Do people vote on issues or do people vote on feelings? We vote on
Americans?
feelings. Americans, absolutely. And at this point in time, it's not even who they vote for, it's will they vote. Right now, we are just trying to get each side trying to get their voters to go and try to play the game because we know that their mind's already made up. It's just a matter of whether they actually show up or not, whether they see investment in the system.